Racist cop punches black woman, but what happens next is unbelievable. In this shocking and eye-opening video, we delve into a deeply troubling incident that has sparked widespread outrage and debate. A disturbing encounter unfolds as a police officer, driven by apparent racial bias, violently assaults a black woman without any justifiable cause. This act of unwarranted aggression highlights the urgent need for accountability and reform within the law enforcement system, as well as the pervasive issue of racial discrimination. If you are enthusiastic about this narrative, please inform us. If you appreciated the video, press 1. If not, select 0. Your feedback genuinely motivates me to collect additional uplifting and significant narratives.
Maya was known throughout the country not just for her political prowess, but for her unwavering stance on social justice and police reform. Having grown up in one of the most marginalized neighborhoods of the city, her life's work had been centered around creating a better, safer environment for communities like the one she came from. However, even as one of the most prominent and respected black senators in the nation, she was no stranger to moments of prejudice that could arise in the blink of an eye, and tonight would prove no exception. Wearing a simple black tracksuit and sneakers, Maya didn't look like the powerful figure that graced Capitol Hill and spoke at high-profile events. She looked like any other local resident out for an evening walk. She didn't mind blending in. It reminded her of the years before she rose to prominence. For her, such walks were a way to clear her head and reconnect with the world outside of political pressures. She had intentionally taken a quieter route home after her meeting, hoping for a few moments of solitude before returning to her apartment. Meanwhile, not far down the road, Officer Conrad Jenkins sat in his patrol car. He was on edge. The tension in his jaw and the restless tapping of his fingers against the steering wheel betrayed the frustration simmering within him. Jenkins wasn't new to law enforcement, but he was new to this district. He had been transferred here after several complaints in his previous precinct about aggressive behavior during routine stops. Although no formal disciplinary action had ever been taken against him, whispers about his conduct followed him wherever he went. And now, patrolling an area he considered problematic, his instincts were already on high alert, fueled by his inherent biases. Conrad glanced at the time on his dashboard. His shift was nearing its end, but he hadn't yet found any real action to justify the night. As he drove through the quiet streets, something caught his attention: a lone figure walking on the sidewalk up ahead. His eyes narrowed as he observed her from a distance. A woman, wearing dark clothing, walking alone at this hour. It didn't sit right with him. He had been trained to spot what he called out-of-place behavior, and to him, this fit the bill perfectly. He didn't recognize her, and in his mind, she didn't belong in this part of town. Without a second thought, Conrad slowed his patrol car and pulled over to the side of the road. He didn't radio it in. This was something he intended to handle on his own. His fingers tightened around the wheel for a moment before he exited the vehicle, his heavy boots hitting the pavement with a dull thud. As he approached Maya from behind, his posture was rigid and his hand rested near his belt, close to where his service weapon was holstered. To Conrad, this was just another routine stop, another potential threat that needed to be neutralized before it became a problem. Hearing footsteps behind her, Maya instinctively turned her head. She spotted the approaching officer and immediately sensed the tension in his movements. She had dealt with men like him before: officers who didn't see a citizen, but a suspect who didn't approach with caution, but with preconceived notions of guilt. Despite the immediate surge of adrenaline that coursed through her veins, she maintained her composure, her expression calm and neutral. This wasn't her first encounter with law enforcement, and sadly, she knew it likely wouldn't be her last. Evening, Conrad called out, his tone curt and authoritative as he closed the distance between them. Maya stopped walking and turned to face him fully, keeping her posture relaxed but alert. Out for a late-night stroll, huh? "You live around here?" he added, the thinly veiled suspicion evident in his voice. "Yes, officer." "Is there a problem?" Maya responded evenly, her voice steady and polite. She met his gaze without flinching, refusing to show any sign of intimidation. She knew that, in situations like these, composure was her greatest weapon. Still, she couldn't ignore the subtle tension in the air, the way his eyes flicked over her, as if searching for a reason to escalate the encounter. Conrad didn't like her tone. It wasn't rude, but it wasn't deferential either. In his mind, civilians, especially in neighborhoods like this, should show a certain level of respect, even fear, when approached by law enforcement. The fact that she stood there calmly, without any apparent anxiety, irked him. "Mind telling me where you're headed?" he asked, his voice sharper this time. His hand remained near his belt, a subtle but unmistakable show of force. Maya's eyes flicked briefly to his hand before returning to his face. She could see where this was going, and it wasn't anywhere good. "I'm just heading home." "I live a few blocks from here," she said, her tone still controlled. "Is there a specific reason you stopped me?" Conrad felt his irritation grow. He didn't have a solid reason for stopping her beyond his gut feeling, but he wasn't about to admit that. Instead, he decided to push further, hoping to provoke a reaction that would justify his actions. "There have been reports of suspicious activity in the area. Just making sure everything's in order." Maya raised an eyebrow. She knew this game well: vague accusations, no concrete evidence, and an attempt to assert dominance through intimidation. But she wasn't just any random passerby. She was a senator, someone who had spent years fighting against exactly this kind of profiling and harassment. Still, she wasn't about to reveal her identity just yet. She wanted to see how far he would go. "Well, I can assure you, I'm not involved in any suspicious activity," she said calmly. "If that's all, I'd like to continue on my way." Conrad took a step closer, his body language becoming more aggressive. He was determined not to let her walk away so easily. Something about her composure and confidence made him feel as though he was losing control of the situation, and he didn't like it. "I didn't say you could go," he snapped. "I'm asking the questions here." At that moment, Maya felt a flicker of anger. She had done nothing wrong, yet here she was, being treated like a criminal simply for existing in a public space. But she knew better than to let her emotions get the best of her. Taking a slow breath, she responded, "Then ask something relevant, officer. Otherwise, you're detaining me without cause." The words hit Conrad harder than he expected. He wasn't used to civilians, especially black women, challenging him in this manner. For a moment he hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. Maya, sensing his hesitation, pressed further. "If you have a valid reason for this stop, I suggest you state it clearly. Otherwise, I'll be on my way." Conrad's jaw tightened. He wasn't about to let her dictate the terms of this encounter. But before he could respond, headlights appeared in the distance, approaching quickly. Another patrol car. One of his colleagues had likely seen him and decided to check in. The tension in the air grew thicker as the vehicle slowed to a stop nearby. Maya didn't move. She held her ground, her eyes locked on Conrad's, silently daring him to make his next move. She knew this wasn't over yet, but she was ready for whatever came next. The air around them felt charged, heavy with unspoken tension. Maya stood her ground, her gaze unwavering as she met the cold, probing eyes of Officer Conrad Jenkins. She could see the frustration flicker across his face, a subtle but unmistakable sign that her calm composure was throwing him off balance. He wasn't used to being questioned, much less challenged, by anyone he approached on the street, and certainly not by someone who, in his mind, should have shown immediate compliance. Conrad's mind raced as he tried to figure out his next move. He hadn't expected this interaction to turn into a standoff, but something about Maya's steady presence gnawed at him. She wasn't acting like the usual civilians he encountered, those who would either cower in fear or grow visibly agitated at his questions. No, she was composed, too composed for his liking, and that made him even more suspicious. The second patrol car came to a stop just a few yards away, its engine idling quietly. The driver's side door opened, and another officer stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, and seemingly relaxed in his demeanor. Officer Mike Daniels had been with the force for over 15 years, long enough to recognize when a situation had the potential to spiral out of control. As he approached, he immediately took note of the stiff posture of his colleague and the way the woman before him stood with an air of quiet authority. Something about her seemed familiar, though he couldn't quite place it. Still, it wasn't the time to dwell on that. He needed to de-escalate things before they got worse. "Everything all right here?" Jenkins Daniels asked in a measured tone, his eyes flicking briefly to Maya before settling on Conrad. He knew Jenkins well enough to sense when his partner's temper was getting the better of him. Conrad gave a curt nod, though his grip on his belt remained tight. "Just a routine stop," he said, his voice strained with forced calmness. "Saw her walking alone and thought I'd check things out." Daniels glanced at Maya again, this time taking a longer look. There was something about the way she held herself, shoulders back, chin slightly raised, eyes steady and unflinching, that struck him. Most people would have been visibly nervous in a situation like this, especially with two officers confronting them. But not her. She exuded a quiet confidence, one that didn't come from arrogance but from a deep-seated understanding of who she was and what she stood for. "Ma'am," Daniels said, his tone much softer than Conrad's had been, "is there a reason you're out here tonight? Do you live nearby?" Maya didn't immediately answer. She took a moment to study this new officer, noting the contrast between his approach and that of his partner. He seemed less aggressive, more open to dialogue. But she also knew that appearances could be deceiving. She had encountered enough law enforcement officers in her life to know that even those who appeared reasonable could quickly turn hostile if things didn't go their way. "I do," she finally said, her voice steady. "I live a few blocks from here. I was on my way home when Officer Jenkins decided to stop me without cause." There was no anger in her tone, only a matter-of-fact statement of what had occurred. Daniels raised an eyebrow at that, but didn't immediately respond. Instead, he turned back to Jenkins. "Did she do something specific that raised suspicion?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral. Conrad bristled at the question. He didn't appreciate being second-guessed, especially not in front of the person he had stopped. "It's a high-crime area," he snapped. "She was walking alone at night. Thought it was worth checking out." Daniels didn't outwardly react to Jenkins' defensive tone, but inwardly he sighed. This wasn't the first time Jenkins had used such a flimsy excuse to justify an unnecessary stop. And while Daniels understood the importance of being vigilant in certain neighborhoods, he also knew that stops like these, based on nothing more than vague suspicion, did more harm than good. He turned back to Maya, offering a small, conciliatory nod. "I understand this may seem unnecessary, Ma'am. We're just trying to keep the area safe." Maya's eyes narrowed slightly at that. She had heard variations of this line countless times before, attempts to cloak racial profiling under the guise of public safety. "Safe for whom, Officer Daniels?" she asked, her voice calm but pointed. "Because it doesn't feel very safe for me right now." The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Daniels opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, Jenkins stepped forward, clearly agitated. "All right, enough of this," he barked. "You're stalling. Show us some ID, or we're going to have a problem." Maya didn't move. She could feel the tension rising, could see the way Jenkins' hand hovered near his belt, ready to escalate things at the slightest provocation. But she wasn't about to let fear dictate her actions. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her hands slightly, palms open in a gesture of non-aggression. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said evenly, "and unless you can provide a legitimate reason for detaining me, I believe we're done here." Conrad's jaw clenched, and for a moment it seemed as though he might lash out. His pride was on the line now, and he wasn't about to let some random woman, no matter how composed she appeared, make a fool out of him. He took another step closer, his voice low and threatening. "You don't get to decide when this is over." Daniels, sensing that things were about to escalate beyond control, quickly stepped between them, placing a hand on Jenkins' chest to hold him back. "Easy, Jenkins," he said quietly but firmly. "We're not looking to cause trouble." He turned to Maya, his expression apologetic. "Look, Ma, I get that this situation is tense. Let's just all take a step back and handle this calmly." Maya didn't respond immediately. She could see that Daniels was genuinely trying to de-escalate, but she also knew that Jenkins was still a wild card. One wrong move, one perceived slight, and things could spiral out of control. After a moment, she gave a small nod. "I appreciate your attempt to keep things calm, Officer Daniels," she said, "but your partner seems intent on escalating this unnecessarily." Daniels shot a warning glance at Jenkins, who glared back but said nothing. Turning back to Maya, Daniels tried again. "How about this just show us some ID, and we'll be on our way? No harm, no foul." Maya considered his request. She knew that she had every right to refuse. She hadn't been doing anything illegal, and the officers had no real grounds to demand identification. But she also knew that refusing might provoke Jenkins further, and while she was more than capable of handling herself, she didn't want to risk things turning violent. With a quiet sigh, she reached into her jacket pocket, slowly pulling out her wallet. She opened it, revealing her senator's ID card, the bold lettering and official seal clearly visible under the streetlights. "I hope this clears things up," she said, her tone calm but laced with an unmistakable edge. Daniels blinked in surprise as he registered the information on the card. Jenkins, meanwhile, went pale, his bravado evaporating in an instant. For a long moment, there was silence. Then Daniels let out a low breath, muttering under his breath, "Oh, hell!" Under the dim glow of the streetlights, the tension in the air grew thicker. Officer Jenkins stood frozen, his mind racing as he tried to process what he had just seen: Senator Maya Collins. A name that had been in every news headline for months, especially as a result of her aggressive push for police reform and accountability. Jenkins' fingers twitched slightly, his earlier bravado now replaced by a gnawing sense of unease. He glanced sideways at Officer Daniels, who was staring at Maya's identification with a mixture of disbelief and alarm. Daniels wasn't a fool. He knew they had just stumbled into a situation far more serious than a routine stop. But if Jenkins was anything, it was stubborn. His pride, bruised by Maya's calm defiance and her obvious authority, wouldn't let him back down easily. He cleared his throat, attempting to regain some semblance of control. "How do I know this isn't fake?" he asked, his voice more defensive than aggressive now. It wouldn't be the first time someone tried to flash a phony ID. Daniels shot him a sharp look. "Jenkins, are you serious right now?" he hissed under his breath. "That's a federal ID. You can't fake something like that. And even if you could, who in their right mind would do it just to walk down a street?" He turned back to Maya, his tone apologetic. "I'm sorry for the misunderstanding, ma'am. We didn't realize who you were." Maya's eyes didn't leave Jenkins, who was still standing rigidly, his hand hovering near his belt. She could see the conflict playing out in his mind, the battle between his wounded ego and the growing realization that he had crossed a line. Daniels, at least, seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation, but Jenkins was a different story. Men like him didn't like being challenged, especially by someone they perceived as beneath them. And in that moment, Maya knew that simply revealing her identity wasn't going to be enough to diffuse the situation entirely. "Is that all?" Officer Jenkins, Maya asked, her voice calm but firm. "Or do you need further verification?" Her words were measured, but there was an unmistakable edge to them, a quiet authority that left no room for misinterpretation. Jenkins bristled at her tone, but he couldn't find the words to respond. The weight of the situation was pressing down on him, and for the first time that night, he felt a flicker of fear, not for his safety, but for his career. Daniels, sensing that things could still go south if Jenkins didn't back down, took a step forward, subtly positioning himself between his partner and Maya. "We should go," he said quietly to Jenkins. "We've got nothing here." Let's not make this worse, but Jenkins wasn't ready to let it go. His pride wouldn't allow it. He had started this encounter with the intent to assert his authority, and now it felt as though that authority was slipping through his fingers. "She still hasn't answered my questions," Jenkins said, his voice tight with frustration. "Just because she's a senator doesn't mean she's above the law." Daniels opened his mouth to respond, but Maya spoke first. "No one is above the law, Officer Jenkins," she said evenly. "Including you." The statement hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment it seemed as though Jenkins might lash out, driven by a mix of anger and humiliation. Instead, he took a step back, his expression hardening. "Fine," he muttered. "But don't think this means you can do whatever you want. We're just doing our job." Maya didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a slow breath, her eyes still locked on Jenkins. She knew that engaging further would only escalate things, but she also knew that walking away without addressing the underlying issue would be a missed opportunity. This wasn't just about her, it was about every person who had been stopped, questioned, and harassed without cause. "You might want to reconsider how you define doing your job, Officer Jenkins," she said finally. "Because right now it looks a lot like harassment." Daniels winced at her words, knowing that they were likely to set Jenkins off again. He placed a hand on his partner's shoulder, a silent plea for him to let it go. "Come on, man," Daniels said quietly. "Let's just leave." But Jenkins shrugged off Daniels' hand, his frustration boiling over. "You think you can just walk around like you own the place because you're a senator?" he snapped, his voice rising. "People like you think you're untouchable, but out here, you're just another person." Maya's expression didn't change, but inside she felt a spark of anger. She had spent her entire career fighting against exactly this kind of mentality, the belief that authority granted the right to intimidate and belittle. She took a step forward, closing the distance between herself and Jenkins, her eyes never leaving his. "And people like you," she said quietly, "are the reason we need reform. Because you can't seem to tell the difference between protecting the public and abusing your power." The words hit Jenkins like a slap. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Daniels stepped in again, this time more forcefully. "That's enough," Daniels said firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. He turned to Maya, his expression apologetic once more. I think it's best if we all go our separate ways. This doesn't need to go any further." For a moment, Maya considered pushing the issue. She could demand Jenkins' badge number, file a formal complaint, and ensure that there were consequences for his actions. But she knew that wouldn't solve the larger problem. Men like Jenkins didn't change because of disciplinary action, they changed when they were forced to confront the reality of their behavior. "Fine," she said finally. "But this isn't over." Daniels gave a brief nod, relieved that things hadn't escalated further. He grabbed Jenkins' arm, steering him back toward their patrol car. "Let's go," he muttered under his breath. Jenkins resisted for a moment before finally allowing himself to be led away. As they walked back to the car, Daniels glanced over his shoulder at Maya, a silent acknowledgement of the tension that still hung in the air. Maya watched them go, her mind racing. She knew she had handled the situation as well as she could, but it still left a bitter taste in her mouth. This wasn't the first time she had been profiled, and she doubted it would be the last. But tonight something felt different. Tonight, she wasn't just another person stopped by a power-hungry cop. Tonight, she was a senator, someone with the power to make real change, and she intended to use that power. As the patrol car drove away, Maya pulled out her phone and dialed a number. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered. "This is Collins, it's me," Maya said, her voice calm but resolute. "I just had an encounter with 2 officers. I need you to document it." There was a brief pause on the other end before the voice responded. "Understood. Do you want to escalate this?" Maya considered the question for a moment before replying. "Not yet, but I want their names, their records, and any complaints filed against them. And I want it by morning." "Got it," the voice said. "Anything else?" Maya glanced down the street, where the patrol car had disappeared from view. "Yes," she said quietly. "I want to know how many other people they've stopped tonight. And I want to know why." Hanging up, Maya slipped her phone back into her pocket and began walking again, her mind already turning over the events of the evening. She knew that this was only the beginning. What had started as a routine stop had turned into something much more significant, a reminder of why she had entered politics in the first place. And as she made her way home, one thought remained at the forefront of her mind: change was coming, and she was going to be the one to bring it. Under the dim glow of her apartment's entry light, Maya Collins closed the door behind her, exhaling slowly as she leaned momentarily against the frame. The tension from the encounter with the officers still lingered in her muscles, coiled tight like a spring ready to snap. As a senator and a seasoned advocate for justice, she had dealt with more than her share of hostile confrontations, but tonight's experience struck a different chord. It wasn't just another case of racial profiling, it was a personal reminder of why her work was far from done. The fight for accountability and fairness wasn't theoretical, it played out in real time, on real streets, against people like her who were forced to navigate a world where implicit bias could turn an ordinary evening walk into a dangerous power struggle. She dropped her keys onto the small wooden table by the door, her fingers lingering over the cool metal for a moment as she replayed the events in her mind. The officer's face, twisted with frustration and pride, stood out sharply in her memory. He hadn't seen a senator in front of him. He had seen a black woman who didn't fit his narrative of who should or shouldn't belong in that part of the city. Even after she presented her credentials, his reluctance to back down, his refusal to acknowledge his error, it was all too familiar. Maya straightened up, pushing herself away from the door. She couldn't afford to let the anger simmer unchecked. There was work to be done, and dwelling on emotions wouldn't get her closer to the systemic change she was fighting for. Crossing the room, she grabbed her laptop from the sleek black leather bag she always carried and set it down on the glass coffee table. She opened the device, the soft glow of the screen illuminating her face in the dimly lit living room. Her inbox was already flooding with messages, some from constituents, others from political allies who had gotten wind of the incident almost as soon as it happened. She hadn't expected word to travel so quickly, but in an era where every action could be documented and shared within moments, it wasn't surprising. Still, she hadn't wanted this to turn into a public spectacle, not yet. There was strategy in timing, and right now she needed to gather information before deciding on her next move. A message from her chief of staff, Jordan, caught her eye. The subject line read, "Immediate follow-up officer profiles attached." Maya clicked it open, quickly scanning through the contents. Jordan had wasted no time in pulling together a preliminary report on the two officers involved in the stop. Officer Michael Daniels, 15 years on the force, clean record, known for his calm demeanor and generally cooperative approach. Officer Conrad Jenkins, on the other hand, was a different story altogether. Several unofficial complaints of aggressive conduct, though none of them had ever escalated to formal disciplinary action. Maya's jaw tightened as she read through the list of incidents. It was a familiar pattern: unchecked behavior, lack of accountability, and a department willing to look the other way as long as things didn't reach the public eye. Jordan's message ended with a brief note: "I can push this further if you want, but I suggest we tread carefully. Let me know how you want to proceed." Maya leaned back against the plush grey sofa, her mind working through the options. She could go public with the information, leverage her political influence to draw attention to the issue and force the department's hand. It wouldn't be the first time she had used public pressure to bring about change. But something about this felt different. Jenkins wasn't just another officer with a bad attitude. There was a deeper rot here, something that went beyond one man's actions. If she was going to make a lasting impact, she needed more than just a headline. She needed to expose the system that allowed people like him to operate unchecked. Her thoughts were interrupted by the vibration of her phone against the glass table. She glanced down at the screen. Jordan was calling. Maya picked up, keeping her voice steady despite the fatigue pressing down on her. "Jordan." "Gordon." "Hey," Jordan's voice came through, calm but carrying an undercurrent of concern. "I figured you'd still be up. Did you get my email?" "I did," Maya replied. "Thanks for pulling that together so quickly. What's your take?" There was a brief pause on the other end, the sound of papers shuffling faintly in the background. "Honestly? This Jenkins guy is a liability waiting to explode. He's had enough complaints that someone higher up has to be aware of his behavior, but for whatever reason they've kept it under wraps. My guess? He's protected. Either someone's covering for him, or they're too afraid of stirring the pot to do anything about it." Maya nodded, even though Jordan couldn't see her. It was exactly what she had suspected. And Daniels, straight shooter, from what I can tell, probably got stuck with Jenkins on patrol because no one else wanted to partner with him. He didn't escalate the situation, and based on the notes I found, he's got a decent reputation. If anyone's likely to talk, it's him. That was useful information. If Daniels was as reasonable as his record suggested, he might be willing to provide insight into what was happening inside the department. But that would require a careful approach. Coming on too strong could backfire, especially if he felt like his job might be at risk. "All right," Maya said after a moment. "Reach out to Daniels discreetly. See if he's willing to meet off the record. I want to get a sense of what's going on before we take this any further." "Will do," Jordan replied. "And Jenkins." Maya's eyes hardened. "Keep digging. I want to know everything there is to know about him, who he's connected to, what cases he's worked, and why he's still on the force despite all those complaints. If there's a pattern, we need to find it." "Got it. I'll get back to you as soon as I have something." They ended the call, and Maya set the phone down, her fingers drumming lightly against the armrest of the sofa. This wasn't just about one bad cop. It was about a system that allowed people like him to operate without fear of consequences. She had spent years fighting for legislation aimed at increasing police accountability, but tonight's encounter had made it painfully clear that policy alone wasn't enough. Real change required exposing the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. As she sat there, contemplating her next move, a thought struck her. Jenkins' reaction during the stop hadn't just been about ego, it had been about fear. Fear of losing control, fear of being exposed. He had seen her as a threat, not because she posed any physical danger, but because she represented something he couldn't intimidate or overpower. And that fear had driven him to escalate the situation beyond reason. Maya knew she could use that fear to her advantage. People like Jenkins thrived in the shadows, protected by a culture of silence and complacency. But once that protection was stripped away, once they were forced into the light, they either crumbled or revealed the true extent of the system's decay. She closed her laptop, the screen going dark as she leaned forward, elbows resting on her knees. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of dismantling that protection. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but she had never been one to back down from a fight. And this was a fight worth having not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been stopped, questioned, or harassed simply for existing. The night stretched on, quiet and still, but Maya's mind remained sharp, her resolve unyielding. Change was coming, and this time she wouldn't stop until the system that allowed officers like Jenkins to thrive was exposed for what it truly was. The following morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds of Maya Collins' apartment, casting faint golden streaks across the room. She had barely slept, her mind too occupied with the events of the previous night and the weight of what lay ahead. As a senator, she had grown accustomed to long nights and early mornings, but this was different. This wasn't just about crafting legislation or lobbying for support, this was personal. The encounter with Officer Jenkins wasn't an isolated incident, it was a stark reminder that the very issues she fought against in office continued to fester unchecked on the streets. Maya took a sip of her coffee, its warmth doing little to ease the tension in her chest. Her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her attention away from her thoughts. It was a message from Jordan Daniels, agreed to meet. Noon. Discreet location. She allowed herself a small, satisfied nod. Daniels could be a valuable ally in unraveling the inner workings of the department, but she knew better than to assume he would hand over information freely. Trust was a fragile thing, especially when it involved speaking out against one's own. The clock ticked past 10 as Maya began preparing for the day. Her attire was carefully chosen, not too formal, but still professional enough to command respect. Dark slacks, a fitted blazer, and a simple blouse. She knew appearances mattered, especially in situations where perception could influence outcomes. By the time she left her apartment, her mind was already formulating the questions she intended to ask Daniels. She needed more than vague anecdotes, she needed concrete evidence of systemic issues, patterns of abuse, and, most importantly, names. The meeting spot was a small, nondescript cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. It was the kind of place frequented by locals who valued privacy and good coffee. Maya arrived early, taking a seat at a corner table where she could observe the entrance without being immediately noticed. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the muted hum of conversation, creating an atmosphere of calm that belied the seriousness of the discussion about to take place. A few minutes later, Daniels entered. He was dressed in plainclothes jeans and a button-up shirt, but his posture and the way he scanned the room betrayed his background as a cop. He spotted Maya almost immediately and made his way over, his expression guarded but not unfriendly. "Senator," he greeted, pulling out the chair across from her. "Thanks for meeting me." His voice was steady, but Maya could detect a hint of nervousness beneath the surface. This wasn't an easy situation for him, and she respected the courage it took to show up. "Thank you for coming, Officer Daniels," she replied, offering a small, polite smile. "I appreciate your willingness to speak with me." Daniels nodded, his fingers tapping lightly against the table as he gathered his thoughts. "Look, I don't want to get caught up in something that could cost me my job," he began, his tone cautious. "But after last night, I couldn't just ignore it. Jenkins, he's got a reputation." Maya leaned forward slightly, her expression attentive but neutral. A reputation for what, exactly? Daniels hesitated for a moment, glancing around the cafe as if ensuring no one was listening. For being reckless, he said finally. He's been known to push boundaries, to escalate situations that didn't need escalating. He's had complaints filed against him, but nothing ever sticks. Somehow he always manages to walk away clean. Why do you think that is? Maya asked, her voice calm but direct. Is he protected by someone higher up? Daniels shrugged, his shoulders tense. Maybe. Or maybe it's just the way the system works. Officers like Jenkins, they know how to play the game. They know how to write their reports, how to frame things in a way that makes it look like they were just doing their job. And the department, well, they don't want the bad press that comes with admitting they've got a problem. Maya nodded slowly, absorbing his words. It was exactly what she had suspected, but hearing it confirmed by someone on the inside gave it more weight. What about last night? She asked. From your perspective, what happened? Daniels sighed, running a hand through his hair. Honestly, it shouldn't have gone the way it did. You weren't doing anything wrong. Jenkins, he saw you and decided you didn't belong. And once he made up his mind, there was no talking him down. That's why I stepped in. I could see where it was headed. And if you hadn't stepped in, Maya pressed, her gaze steady. Daniels didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked down at his hands, as if considering the implications of what he was about to say. It could have gotten ugly, he admitted quietly. Jenkins has a temper. Once he feels challenged, he doubles down. I've seen it happen before. Maya felt a spark of anger at his words, though she kept her expression composed. This wasn't just about one bad cop, it was about a culture that allowed officers like Jenkins to operate with impunity. Has anyone ever tried to hold him accountable? She asked. Filed formal complaints, taken it up the chain of command. Plenty of people, Daniels said with a bitter laugh. But nothing ever comes of it. Complaints disappear, investigations go nowhere. The few officers who've spoken out against him, let's just say their careers didn't last long after that. The pieces were falling into place, painting a picture of a department riddled with corruption and fear. Maya knew that if she wanted to bring about real change, she couldn't rely solely on public pressure. She needed to dismantle the structures that enabled officers like Jenkins to thrive. Daniels, I won't ask you to put your career on the line, she said after a moment. But if you're willing, I could use your help. Off the record, of course. I need to understand how deep this goes, who's protecting him, how complaints are being buried, and what it will take to expose the truth. Daniels hesitated, clearly torn. He had no love for Jenkins or the system that protected him, but he also knew the risks involved in speaking out. After a long pause, he finally nodded. All right, he said quietly. I'll help. But we have to be careful. If word gets out that I'm involved, it won't, Maya assured him. I'll make sure of that. They spent the next hour discussing details, names, incidents, patterns of behavior. By the time they parted ways, Maya felt more determined than ever. She now had a clearer picture of the obstacles ahead, but she also had an ally on the inside. It was a start. As she left the cafe, her phone buzzed again. This time it was another message from Jordan. New intel on Jenkins. Looks like he's connected to a senior officer. Call me when you're free. Maya's eyes narrowed as she read the message. A connection to a senior officer could explain a lot: why Jenkins had been able to evade accountability, why complaints against him never gained traction. She dialed Jordan's number as she walked, her mind already racing with possibilities. What did you find? She asked as soon as he picked up. Jenkins is tight with Lieutenant Harper, Jordan said without preamble. Harper's been with the department for over 20 years, and he's got a lot of influence. If anyone's been protecting Jenkins, it's him. Maya's jaw tightened. She had heard of Harper before he was known for his old-school mentality and resistance to reform. If he was behind Jenkins' continued presence on the force, then taking him down would be no small feat. But Maya wasn't one to back down from a challenge. "Keep digging," she told Jordan. "I want to know everything about Harper, his connections, his history, anything we can use." "Will do," Jordan replied. "What's the plan?" "The plan," Maya said, her voice resolute, "is to expose them. All of them." Later that evening, Maya sat at her desk, her mind churning with the weight of everything she had learned. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly falling into place, but she knew that uncovering the truth was only half the battle. The real challenge would be exposing it without giving Jenkins or his protector, Lieutenant Harper, a chance to bury it once again. The stakes were high, not just for her personally, but for every person who had been subjected to the unchecked power of officers like Jenkins. Maya had fought battles like this before against powerful lobbyists, entrenched politicians, and corporations who didn't want their interests disrupted. But this was different. This wasn't a fight she could win through public speeches or carefully crafted policy proposals. This was a fight that required strategy, precision, and most of all, undeniable evidence. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was Jordan again, this time calling instead of texting. Maya picked up immediately. "What's new?" she asked, keeping her tone brisk. "I found something," Jordan said, his voice low and urgent. "It's not just complaints against Jenkins that have disappeared. There's a pattern here, multiple officers with similar records, all tied to Harper. It looks like he's been protecting more than just Jenkins. He's built a network of guys who know they can act with impunity because he's got their backs." Maya leaned forward, her heart pounding. This was bigger than she had anticipated. A single corrupt officer was one thing, but an entire network operating under the protection of a high-ranking lieutenant was something else entirely. "How many are we talking about?" she asked. "At least 6 that I can confirm," Jordan replied. "But there could be more. The thing is, they've been smart about it. Most of the complaints that did get filed never made it past the preliminary stages. Either they were dismissed outright, or they were resolved internally, no paper trail, no formal investigations." Maya exhaled slowly, trying to process the implications. This wasn't just about Jenkins anymore, it was about a culture of corruption that had taken root within the department. Exposing it would mean going up against not just Harper and his network, but the entire system that had allowed it to flourish. "Jordan, we need something concrete," she said after a moment. "Something they can't deny or spin. Complaints and accusations won't be enough, they'll just claim it's hearsay or disgruntled civilians trying to cause trouble." "I've been thinking the same thing," Jordan admitted. "There's one angle we might be able to use. I found a case from a few years ago, an internal investigation that was shut down before it could go anywhere. The officer who initiated it left the force not long after. If we can track him down, he might be willing to talk." Maya's mind raced as she considered the possibilities. An insider willing to come forward could be exactly what they needed to blow the lid off Harper's operation. But convincing someone to speak out, especially against powerful figures with a history of silencing dissent, wouldn't be easy. "Do you have a name?" she asked. "Yeah," Jordan said. "His name's Marcus Hayes. He was a detective at the time, worked directly under Harper. From what I can tell, he had a solid reputation until he tried to bring something to light and suddenly found himself on the outs." Maya jotted down the name, her mind already formulating a plan. "Find out where he is now," she instructed. "If he's still in the city, I want to meet him." "I'm on it," Jordan said. "But Maya, be careful. If Harper gets wind of what we're doing." "I know," Maya interrupted, her voice firm. "That's why we have to move fast." The longer we wait, the more time they have to cover their tracks. They ended the call, and Maya sat back, tapping her pen against the edge of the desk. She knew Jordan was right, this was dangerous territory. But she also knew that if they didn't act, nothing would change. Harper and his network would continue operating in the shadows, and officers like Jenkins would keep getting away with misconduct. That wasn't something she could accept. The following afternoon, Maya found herself sitting across from Marcus Hayes in a small, quiet diner on the outskirts of the city. He was a tall man in his early 40s, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. Despite his casual attire, there was an air of tension about him, as though he was constantly on guard. "I wasn't sure if I should come," Marcus said, his voice low but steady. "Talking about Harper. It's not something I ever planned on doing again." "I appreciate you taking the risk," Maya replied. "I know it's not easy, but I also know that if we don't do something, people will keep getting hurt." Marcus studied her for a moment, as if trying to gauge her sincerity. Eventually he nodded. "Harper's been running things his way for a long time," he said. "He's smart, knows how to cover his tracks. But back when I was still on the force, I started seeing things that didn't add up: complaints disappearing, reports being altered, officers getting a pass when they should have been disciplined." "What happened when you tried to report it?" Maya asked. Marcus's expression darkened. "I went to Internal Affairs, thought they'd at least look into it. But instead, they shut it down. Told me I was overreacting, that I didn't have enough evidence. Next thing I know, I'm being reassigned to a dead-end desk job. They made it clear that if I kept pushing, my career was over." "And that's when you left," Maya said quietly. "Yeah," Marcus admitted. "Didn't see much point in sticking around after that, but it always bothered me knowing that guys like Harper were still out there, still pulling the strings." Maya leaned forward, her tone serious. "Marcus, I'm not asking you to put yourself in harm's way, but if you have anything, documents, records, anything that proves what Harper's been doing, it could make a difference. We're building a case, but we need hard evidence." Marcus hesitated, clearly weighing his options. After a long pause, he nodded. "I kept copies of some things," he said. "Didn't know if I'd ever need them, but I figured better safe than sorry. They're old, but they might be enough to show a pattern." "Anything helps," Maya said. "And if you're willing to go on record, even anonymously, it could strengthen our case." Marcus exhaled slowly, the weight of the decision evident in his expression. "All right," he said finally, "I'll help. But you need to be careful. Harper's got connections, and if he thinks you're coming for him, he won't hesitate to retaliate." Maya nodded. She was well aware of the risks, but she also knew that this was a fight worth having. "Thank you, Marcus. We'll be careful." They exchanged contact information, and Maya left the diner feeling a renewed sense of purpose. They finally had something tangible, evidence from someone who had been on the inside. It wasn't enough to bring down Harper just yet, but it was a start. That evening, as Maya reviewed the documents Marcus had provided, her phone buzzed with a new message from Jordan Harper's onto something. "Jenkins is acting paranoid. We need to move faster." Maya's heart skipped a beat. The clock was ticking, and the window of opportunity was closing fast. But instead of fear, she felt a surge of determination. Harper might have built a fortress around himself, but no fortress was impenetrable. With Marcus's testimony, Jordan's intel, and her own resolve, they had a chance to expose the truth. It was time to act. The following morning dawned cold and grey, a reflection of the tension hanging in the air. Maya Collins knew that today was going to be pivotal. The pieces were in place: Marcus's testimony, Jordan's intel, and the mounting pressure on Harper's network. But now came the hardest part: executing the plan without giving their opponents a chance to bury the truth. She stood by the window of her office, sipping her coffee as she gazed out over the city. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of everything they were up against. Years of unchecked power, a deeply entrenched culture of corruption, and a system that was designed to protect its own. Her phone rang, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was Jordan. Morning she greeted, her voice calm despite the anticipation coursing through her. "What's the update?" "They're feeling the heat," Jordan said without preamble. "Harper's been calling in favors all morning. Jenkins has been pulled off patrol, and I'm hearing whispers that they're scrambling to figure out what we have on them." Maya allowed herself a small smile. "Good. That means they're vulnerable." "It also means they're desperate," Jordan warned. "We need to be careful. If they think they're backed into a corner, they might do something drastic." "I'm aware," Maya said. "But we can't stop now. Do we have everything ready for the press conference?" "Almost," Jordan replied. "I've got the documents Marcus provided, along with a summary of the complaints and internal reports we've managed to dig up. It's enough to establish a pattern of misconduct and cover-ups. But we still need something stronger to link it all directly to Harper." Maya frowned, considering his words. They had plenty of evidence to create public outrage, but without a direct link to Harper's involvement, there was a risk that the department would sacrifice a few lower-level officers to protect its leadership. They needed something undeniable, something that would force the department's hand. "Let's bring Marcus in," Maya said after a moment. "If he's willing to speak publicly, it could tip the scales in our favor." "I'll reach out to him," Jordan said. "But you know the risks. Once he goes public, Harper will come after him." "I know," Maya said quietly. "But if we don't do this, nothing will change. Marcus understands that. He wouldn't have come forward if he wasn't ready to take that risk." They ended the call, and Maya set her phone down, her mind racing. She knew that what they were about to do would have far-reaching consequences not just for Harper and his network, but for the entire department. There would be backlash, attempts to discredit her and those involved, and likely even threats. But she had come too far to back down now. By noon, everything was set. Maya stood at the podium in a packed conference room, flanked by Jordan, Marcus, and a handful of trusted allies. The room buzzed with anticipation as reporters murmured among themselves, their cameras and microphones ready to capture every word. Maya took a deep breath, steadying herself before beginning. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I stand before you today not just as a senator, but as a citizen of this city, a city that I love and have dedicated my life to improving. Last night, I had a personal encounter with members of our law enforcement that highlighted a deeply troubling issue, one that many in our community have faced for years." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on her. "This isn't just about one officer or one incident. This is about a pattern of misconduct, abuse of power, and a culture that has allowed certain individuals to act with impunity, knowing that they will be protected by those in positions of authority." Maya gestured toward Marcus, who stepped forward, his expression serious but resolute. "I'd like to introduce Marcus Hayes, a former detective who served this city honorably until he was forced out for trying to expose the very issues we're here to address." Marcus took the microphone, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "I joined the force because I believed in protecting and serving my community. But what I found was a system that prioritized loyalty over integrity, a system where speaking out against misconduct was punished instead of encouraged. I saw firsthand how complaints were dismissed, how evidence was buried, and how officers who tried to do the right thing were silenced." He held up a folder containing copies of the documents he had provided. These are just a few examples of the reports that never saw the light of day. They show a clear pattern: officers engaging in misconduct, complaints being filed, and those complaints disappearing before any real investigation could take place. And at the center of it all was Lieutenant Harper. The room erupted into a flurry of activity as reporters scrambled to take notes and ask questions. Maya stepped forward again, raising her hand to restore order. "We are calling for an independent investigation into Lieutenant Harper and the officers under his command. We are also demanding that the department take immediate action to address the systemic issues that have allowed this behavior to continue unchecked." A reporter raised his hand, and Maya nodded toward him. "Senator Collins, are you concerned about potential retaliation for coming forward with these allegations?" Maya met his gaze without flinching. Retaliation is always a concern when confronting those in power. But I refuse to let fear dictate my actions. This is about accountability, about ensuring that every citizen, regardless of their background, can feel safe in their own community. And I believe that the people of this city deserve better. Another reporter jumped in. "Do you believe this will lead to real change, or is it just another scandal that will be swept under the rug?" "That depends on all of us," Maya replied. "Change doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen without persistence. But I am committed to seeing this through, no matter how long it takes." The press conference continued for another half hour, with Maya and Marcus answering questions and laying out their case. By the time it ended, the room was buzzing with energy. The story was out, and there was no turning back. Later that evening, Maya sat in her office, watching as the news unfolded on the screen. Every major network was covering the story, dissecting the evidence and speculating on what would happen next. Harper and his network had gone silent, but she knew it was only a matter of time before they responded. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jordan. "We did it. They can't ignore this now." Maya allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. They had taken the first step, but the fight was far from over. There would be investigations, hearings, and undoubtedly attempts to discredit her and Marcus. But for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. They had exposed the truth, and with it, they had given the city a chance to demand real change. As the night deepened, Maya leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on the city skyline. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she was ready. Because this wasn't just about one fight, it was about building a future where justice wasn't just a word, but a reality for everyone.